This video is sponsored by Squarespace, and you'll hear more about them later in the video. I think it goes without saying that Daredevil Born Again, compared to most recent Marvel releases, is pretty surprising in terms of quality. That was definitely a point to worry about considering some recent shows, Secret Invasion, and it is nice that Marvel didn't absolutely butcher Daredevil Born Again. With that said, I still think the show is flawed in some areas, and I'm going to be mostly critiquing Born Again in this review. Keep in mind there are definitely some strong points, like Charlie Cox as Daredevil. He's effortlessly charming and charismatic, and is an outstanding actor who can adeptly deliver nuanced beats of acting. Then occasionally when he explodes and his emotions pour out, it's deeply euphoric.
You know he gets to breathe the same air that you breathe. You feel good about that? He got life!
Oh shit.
He's single-handedly what makes the show work, and it feels like the creators really rely on that fact and put all of the emphasis on Daredevil this season, which you may think is great, but I think this introduces one of the major flaws of Born Again in that the roster of supporting characters are flat out dull and uninteresting. Like, throughout all of the interactions between characters this season, what were you most interested in? Right away, your mind probably goes to the trio dynamic of Karen, Matt, and Frank, and there's really no contest. It doesn't feel like the writers give any of the side characters a chance. They're all just here to deliver exposition, and some characters who are really close to Matt, like Kirsten, still come across as feeling shallow. I'd even argue that Heather is flat, and the writers don't add anything to chew on for her character until she reveals her hate boner for vigilantes towards the end of the season, which I do like the irony there. But the writers never explore this in depth with dialogue. It just comes up and then Matt immediately runs into the next scene. And towards the end of the season, she starts gaslighting Matt about his suspicions towards Fisk being completely misplaced, which feels wild that she wouldn't by default be on his side. Without good side characters to aid your main character, that essentially cripples most scenes, and because of this, Born Again is a show that's primarily driven by its plot. While for the Netflix show, by far some of the most compelling scenes were its long, engaging dialogue scenes. Every character was so rich, and pairing any of them together yielded some of the most interesting and well-written dialogue. Foggy, Karen, Claire, Sister Maggie, Father Lantom, Elektra, Stick. These are all great side characters who can explore engrossing themes laid about by the writers, and Born Again completely omits this. The only scene that invoked this was when Matt meets with Frank, and towards the end when Karen finally decided to show back up in the story. I know there were a lot of issues with writing and rewriting this show, but even just thinking about continuing Matt's story, it's absolutely baffling to not include Karen and Foggy from the first drafts. They're a literal trio, and season 3 ends with them starting a law firm together. They did obviously end up rewriting them back in, and I think it's painfully apparent that they weren't intended on being in this season. Especially Karen, who just pieces out. And I know I'm kind of late to the death of Foggy discourse, but I still heavily dislike what they did here. Not just in the sense that it's upsetting to bring back a character and then to immediately kill them, and more so from the perspective of how to utilize his death narratively. Killing one of your main side characters is a huge deal, and I feel is something that should be built up to. Keep in mind that throughout season 3, Matt heavily grapples with the notion of abandoning his code and killing Fisk. So speedrunning through all of that nuance and having him forsake that code in the first 10 minutes of the show was flat out jarring. The way you give scenes like this that heavy weight is through build-up and putting that constant mental strain on the main character, like in season 3. So when they're finally put to the question of breaking, there's a huge release of catharsis as to any decision they make. It makes sense for Matt to break here, but the question now becomes, was this actually a satisfying point narratively with well-deserved payoff? For some people, that could be a yes, but for me, it felt cheap and rushed, and was primarily done to put Matt in a convenient position to carry out an arc of slowly moving back to becoming Daredevil, which I feel the writers are only using Foggy's death to put Matt in this position, and because of that, it feels lazy and is a disservice to Foggy's character. Before moving on to the next point, let's talk about today's sponsor, Squarespace. Squarespace is the all-in-one website platform for entrepreneurs to stand out and succeed online. If you're a fan of my channel, then film is probably one of your passions, and pursuing that passion requires creating a website with your portfolio. Squarespace allows you to do this easily with features like adding videos to your website, creating a vast video library. Then, thanks to Squarespace's excellent template designs, you can make your site look effortlessly professional. I never made a portfolio of my work since I went into YouTube, but I was able to make one in less than 20 minutes from my days in film school. If this intrigues you or you want to make a website of your own choosing, then head to squarespace.com and use my discount code SupercutsDelight to get 10% off your first purchase of a website or domain. Now, let's get back to the video. Okay, so all of the characters besides Matt and Wilson are pretty uninteresting, so how is the actual story/plot? To me, it's kind of inconsistent. There were some definite strong points in this season, like I really enjoyed the twist in the courtroom of revealing White Tiger's identity when Matt's witness flaked out, and just that whole trial, and the ending goes in a very juicy direction. Fisk mobilizing this corrupt task force to hunt down vigilantes is a great way to bring a more physical challenge and presence into the show. It kind of tackles a very dark issue within the US of corrupt cops carrying out unprompted violence, while also putting a narrative emphasis on the morality of being a vigilante. Again, something I wish the writers explored in more depth, since that was the season's main focal point. This overall development though of Fisk greatly expanding his operation with this task force gets a little silly and everyone being okay with blatant executions, but whatever, I'll just buy it. And then another aspect here that I really enjoyed was Frank's involvement with this overall dichotomy. I love the irony that this entire task force idolizes the Punisher, who, you know, is a vigilante, and they've repurposed his goal into hunting down vigilantes. It's a great dynamic, and I can't wait to see Frank's upcoming story in this regard. However, I feel this is the most interesting part of the season, and it doesn't really get going until the end, which begs the question, why did we spend all this time on Muse? Why couldn't we just get to this point in the plot faster? Muse to me is a pretty big stain on the season's quality and distracts away from what was making the season better in my eyes. But addressing Muse, he literally comes out of nowhere, he's extremely corny, and is really only here so that Matt has an excuse to don his armor earlier in the plot. Although, I feel it probably would have been more satisfying if they saved that for the climactic moment of Fisk sending in his task force to kill Matt. Imagine how grand that reveal would be, where him crashing through the skylight was the first time we saw him back in his suit. But nope, that's reserved for Muse. And Muse also is associated with one of the worst tropes in writing, where there's a massive coincidence in that he happens to be entangled with someone that's close to Matt. Just absolute nonsense, and his scene where he's talking with Heather was hard to watch, to say the least. All this makes me think is that it's ironic that with how much the show was rewritten, it still needed more rewrites. Like by episode 8, after Poindexter escapes prison, I was like, why couldn't we just move this up in the season? Poindexter is the damaged goods villain, so why have him escape so late into the season? His escape single-handedly rekindled my interest in the show from how insane it was. Maybe Poindexter escaping earlier could be the motivating factor of Matt grappling with the decision of donning his suit again. That would explore a great character introspection of wanting to avenge Foggy. Instead, all of this falls on Muse and the daughter of Hector, Leroy Jenkining into the sewers to confront a serial killer with no plan or weapons, which is just so baffling. This entire subplot makes the narrative so much more muddled and distracted, and why not focus on already great aspects of your story? The season already is basically cut in half since there isn't a resolution, which I guess everyone these days are delivering half seasons, so it seems odd that we couldn't remove Muse from the plot, thus freeing up more time to actually continue the story. Like on one hand, I like where the story is going for season 2, but on the other, why couldn't this have arrived 2 to 3 episodes sooner? Why was there this whole episode of Matt being entangled with a bank heist? Which for that episode, it was enjoyable, albeit convenient that he was there, but if we have a finite amount of episodes for a season, then spending it on an episode that doesn't advance the plot is puzzling. The creators could have undoubtedly been more efficient for how fast we got to certain more substantial plot points, especially since there are barely any interesting characters and the season is predominantly focused on the plot. Like, the end of the season falls flat to me because the band of people here to help Matt take on Fisk had scant little development. If this is where the story is leading, then why not make these characters a bigger priority? If this was a season in a Netflix show, then I think a 13-episode season would have been enough time to tell a complete story here. Instead, it very obviously is another situation in which a studio is getting greedy and doesn't want to have a season that's longer than 10 episodes. That's not allowed anymore. What are we, in the 2010s? I know I've primarily been critiquing Daredevil Born Again in this video, but I feel the season showed some hints on getting close to the quality of its predecessor, which most of my criticisms will probably dissipate for season 2 considering a lot of improvements were made towards the end, like Fisk being in a daunting position, Frank now being prominent in the narrative, Poindexter being out and about, and Karen actually being back. Her scene of support with Matt talking about how Foggy would have fully and unconditionally supported his judgment was a great dialogue scene. I just hope we now get more of that in season 2. I've primarily focused on the writing and plot, and I'll briefly touch on some other aspects like the action. I thought it was mostly pretty good, and the directors captured a heightened sense of brutality and weight. The ending of episode 2 was oddly my favorite action scene because it was so raw and effective. You'd think it would be the climactic showdown in the end, but that scene was unfortunately pretty incoherent and utilized too much slow motion for my taste. Which, for slow motion, it does increase the spectacle. However, if you constantly utilize it, it undercuts that frenetic energy of the scene. I'm still not a big fan of the CGI, and it's not a big issue since it's rarely used. The cinematography is unfortunately a downgrade and doesn't have that sharp realism and gritty texture that the Netflix show had. I did like what they did with changing the aspect ratio of when Matt is using his heightened senses and dials in on a specific sound. It's just kind of funny how they highlight that ability, but then in other scenes, characters somehow sneak up on Matt, or he doesn't notice people getting away who are right next to him. Some other sore points are the timeline being confusing in the sense of how the snap played into affecting Daredevil and its characters. How did Fisk get out of prison so quickly after season 3? Did he get out because of the snap chaos? When Vanessa talks about Fisk leaving, is she talking about what happens in Echo? I don't know, this isn't something that would bother everyone, and it makes its integration into the MCU a bit odd, while also undercutting the massive triumphant ending of season 3 of Daredevil putting Fisk behind bars. But then Fisk is nonchalantly out again. Overall, Daredevil Born Again is a pretty mixed bag, and really just operated in making me more excited to see season 2, instead of fully enjoying the first season or one actual complete season. I honestly kind of thought that they were going to bring back the Defenders and they were going to be sitting at the bar in the end, which would be a pretty insane way to hype up viewers for season 2. They're putting a big emphasis on vigilantes and Matt needing an army, which, now that I think about it, it'll be kind of weird if they don't show up, and it'll operate as a natural way to introduce those characters into the MCU. We'll see how season 2 is, and it'll most likely and hopefully be better. Let me know in the comments what you thought about Daredevil Born Again, and my Letterboxd, Discord, and Patreon links are in the description. Thank you to the true heroes of this video, my top patrons Logan Farmer and Simply Put.